Welcome to World at Work TV. I'm Rose Stanley, and I'm joined today by Alec Levenson from the Center of Effective Organizations at USC. Alec, today we're going to be talking about how HR can better utilize their analytics to maximize employee engagement and return on investment. Can you explain a little bit how you perceive that HR can be doing a better job at these analytics?
So thank you, Rose. The first thing is that when we talk about analytics, the most important thing to understand is that we're not talking about statistics. I think there's a big misunderstanding out there that people think this is about just taking data and running through it and analyzing it, and then some magic numbers come out at the end that tell you everything you need to know. One of the things that we often forget, and which is good to remember, is that analysis is about understanding what's going on in the organization. The data that's sitting at hand often can play a part in that analysis, but bringing what you have in your toolbox as a professional to understand what's actually driving behavior and motivation in the organization, that's one of the most important things. So I start with the root of the word, which is analysis, and go from there. I mean, anytime you go walking into a room full of stakeholders and you have to assess what's going on, what's driving the behavior in that room around a particular meeting or a decision or any kind of initiative that's going on, you're doing an analysis. And it's important to keep that in mind because some of the best data that we have comes from that more, let's say, informal or qualitative look at the business and being able to take the right amount of quantitative data and qualitative assessments and bring them together. And that is when the best analytics takes place.
So they shouldn't just be looking at numbers strictly.
No, they shouldn't just be looking at numbers, and that actually is one of the biggest problems. So all these new software systems that are being created, what the vendors are offering, they can be helpful, but they're kind of like table stakes in a poker game. If you have data sitting in lots of different systems, if you have data on managers' desktops that you can't access readily, if it's hard to be able to take the data and to give it out into simple reporting so you can lessen the burden on your analytics group or whoever has to be creating reports, those systems are helpful. Okay? But all they do is they help give you access to the data that's sitting in your systems and maybe make it easier to manipulate. But that doesn't tell you where is the data that isn't in the systems. Okay? The data that's in the systems usually is about maybe 25% of what we need to know. And I say this as a reformed economist, so that is my background. And economics is renowned for being able to tell big stories with little bits of data. It's probably one of the reasons why I was successful coming and looking at analytic questions within HR when I first started working in this field. But I'm here to say, as the reformed economist, that you actually have to look at much more than those data systems. And so we really have a huge situation right now of putting the cart before the horse, of saying we're going to start with the data at hand, figure out everything we can do with it, and then we're going to go look, if we need to, somewhere else. You actually need to totally turn that around. You need to start with what are the actual issues that are driving the business, that are keeping the business from succeeding. Figure out what those questions are, what data do you need to answer them, and then if that data is readily available, you can turn to applying your statistics or whatever you want to do with it. But you have to put the horse back in front of the cart.
Why do you think that HR is having such difficulties really kind of grasping into the whole idea of data analysis and statistics and really working with this? We hear sometimes that HR is a little bit more ineffectual when it comes to their data analysis in comparison to other departments in the organization. Why do you think that we may be behind a little bit?
When it comes to everything aside from people, there are good metrics that we have to know how we're doing. Although I should say that when it comes to marketing, perhaps we're a little closer to marketing than either we or marketing would want to admit. But that's a good analogy. So let's start with marketing. So in marketing, we have all these messages we're trying to get out there to understand how we're reaching the customer or not. But the data is just not very good. I mean, until Google came along and was able to show things like people clicking on ads on a website, we had no idea how things are registering. But even with that advance, there's a huge amount of putting your finger to the wind and just trying to figure out if your marketing message is making a difference. We have the same problem when it comes to HR. So there isn't this whole treasure trove of data sitting there that can tell us everything we need to know about behavior, motivation, why it is that groups perform the way they do, why it is that people will or won't collaborate across functions, across different geographies, across business units. So that's the data that we need but it's not sitting in the systems. So one part of it is that there is a healthy skepticism that the data that's sitting there is not what we need. And so I think that many good HR professionals who are not necessarily analytically inclined, but who kind of understand, what the limitations are of the data that's sitting there, will look at it and go, I don't need to get myself immersed in it because it's not going to give me all the answers. You have to be able to embrace the data that's there, to be able to tell a story with it, but at the same time put it in its place, compartmentalize it, so that you're not allowing the stories to be told only with that data. I mean, the problem that we have is that business leaders are hardwired to be looking for metrics to how to run the business. Okay? If we have a call center operation, there's all kinds of great metrics on how much time people spend on the phone. You can get information on dropped calls, on whether people are happy with the experience. You can go through any kind of product and service, and the business is getting better and better information on how to run its operations efficiently, and on if it's actually delivering value to the customer at the end of the day. In HR, we are sitting back in the 1950s in many ways with the same models that we had back then about understanding what actually drives behavior motivation. And there haven't been some wonderful new statistical tools that have been created to tell us how to get inside people's brains to understand what's driving their behavior. We know how to do that. It happens through interviews, it happens through surveys. So we can actually collect that data, but oftentimes, even then, it's not everything we need. And so you need to be able to do that holistic assessment of what's going on in the organization, taking both a combination of hard data that's sitting in the archival systems in your ERP, survey data that comes and tells you how people are feeling, and then filling in the white spaces by kind of looking at the whole organization, understanding what's going on.
And I would guess, especially as we move into the future workforce, and we see many organizations taking a look at that whole employee experience, they really need to understand in HR how to utilize that data, but also be able to tell that story. So it almost seems that HR really needs to kind of come up to speed and be able to look at that data and tell that story in order to be able to understand that future workforce. Would that be a correct assessment?
It is a correct assessment, but I'm going to raise the stakes even one higher.
Good.
Which is, if we think back, it's been over 20 years now since HR was told they have to be a strategic partner, have to get a seat at the table. The only way you do that is engaging directly in the business issues. There's a bit of a fallacy out there that we need to be looking just at, say, employee engagement. If you listen to Gallup, they'll say it's all about employee engagement. Well, we know that, in fact, engagement is co-determined with business performance, but you never actually lead into business performance with high employee engagement. I know it's going to sound like sacrilege to some people, but if you think about it, you can never predict where your business is going to go south just by looking at your engagement data. It always happens the other way around. At first, the business results will fall. That then causes people to be disengaged. In some cases, in some rare cases, if you have a pocket where there's some bad management happening, then that's a good use of employee engagement data, right? If you really don't know what's going on, you look at your engagement survey and it tells you here's where you have a pocket of bad management. That's an important thing to go look at. But more often than not, the difference between having people be kind of average engaged versus high engaged is not really going to tell you where business performance is going to be leading. For that, you have to go to what are the actual businesses that you're in? How is it that you create value? And most importantly, what is your competitive advantage? I know in HR we don't talk about competitive advantage. Here I'll bring back the economist perspective again. But this is the way the business runs. One of the challenges that we have in HR, and which HR often fails to appreciate, is that even on the business side, there is a constant tension between where is it that you have to cut costs to be as efficient as possible, and where is it that you need to be investing so you can build your strategic capability. I don't want to talk in some highfalutin terms about strategy and all this capability, but at the end of the day, it really is about where do you get your competitive advantage. Where you need to be investing more is often in the specific roles where they're helping to give you a leg up over your competitors in the industry, and that's where you need to start focusing your attention. But it's not just on those roles in particular, it's on the whole business process. And that's where you want to focus your analysis. So where is it that we actually can be building and maintaining our competitive advantage? What are the kinds of issues that have to be addressed there? And what are all the tools HR can bring to the table to address them? Whether it's around compensation or training or leadership development or performance management, whatever have you. But figure out what the business needs to be able to be performing better, and then we know where to go improve HR, as opposed to starting with how can we make performance management better? How can we make compensation better? How can we make leadership development better? Those are all putting the cart before the horse. You've got to start with a business issue.
Those are great pieces of advice, Alec. Any last pieces of advice that you'd like to say to HR in terms of what we're talking about here today?
A main one is, I'd say be careful about being able to get away with little bits of data stories. Okay? It can feel very strategic to say, here's a piece of data, tell a good story around it, and you can actually get your business leaders oftentimes to bite on it and then go and run with it. There's a lot of benchmarking that takes place, whether it's benchmarking around turnover or compensation or spans of control or how we're doing our engagement survey. Those can all seem like really enticing pieces of information, and you might be able to tell interesting stories from them. But I challenge you to go back, look at the actual strategy you're trying to accomplish, look at the whole system to understand how that one piece of information actually fits in. And if it doesn't really provide a compelling reason for acting, then don't act. And take a step back and actually go and figure out where are those business barriers. This is not a simple one-step process. I wrote my recent book, Strategic Analytics, precisely because you need to take many steps to be able to get there, but it is possible. And a lot of times it's about taking a step back to be able to say, what are the specific questions we need to be asking? What's the different steps we need to run through? The good news that I have about this whole process is that you actually don't have to be applying lots of statistics. This is something where, when we get back to the original idea of the analysis is about looking around and seeing what's taking place overall in your organization. And statistics only can be applied in some cases. But if we're talking about how is a business unit performing, where is it that people are or are not collaborating across functions, across business units, there's no statistics to apply there. There may be data, but simple data reporting is very different than having to go and run regressions or ANOVAs or those kinds of things. The vast majority of really good analysis and really good analytics doesn't require doing statistics. But it does require challenging yourself and looking at the whole system and making sure that what you're doing directly addresses what the strategic barriers are that are facing the business.
Thanks, Alec. Great information. For World at Work TV, I'm Rose Stanley.